Hello, everyone. This is Dorie Clark, and we're here with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better, where we talk to authors and executives and entrepreneurs about strategies that you can use to improve your life on a regular basis. And today we are talking with Todd Henry. He is a popular author and he has a new book out. It's called Daily Creative. And we're going to talk about how you can interject more creativity into your own life and your own routines. Todd, it's so good to have you here.
Dorie, it is so good to see you again. I know we've often had you on my show, on my podcast. Now I'm glad to sort of be on the other side of it. It'll be fun to kind of turn the tables a little bit.
Absolutely. Yes, your podcast, Accidental Creative, is really fantastic. And I'm eager to talk with you about your new work around this topic. So if you're tuning in, please let us know who you are and where you are watching from. Type into the chat box and let us know. And we want to hear what's on your mind around all topics creative and in our conversation with Todd Henry. So feel free to type your questions in. But Todd, the first question that I have for you, this is a different kind of book that you're doing. Normally you're writing, sort of the businessy books like I do, where there's a narrative strand and you're going through. But the Daily Creative is intended to do something a little bit different. Can you talk about what it is and what your goal was with the project?
Yeah, it is very different. It's really a daily reader for creative professionals. In other words, people who have to solve problems every day. And the format's very intentional. I don't know if you know this, probably do, but the last couple of years we've been going through this thing called a global pandemic, right? And I think many of us were dealing with uncertainties and pressures and constraints that we never had before. And the consistent theme that I was hearing from people as I was working with teams and trying to help them navigate through this is they just felt like they were drowning. People just felt like they were trying to not only get their work done, but also manage all of the new personal life complexities. Maybe families were now at home and we're wrestling with, how do we get work done while also navigating school and all these other things. And also, by the way, now we're working at 11 o'clock at night because we can, because our workspace is our living space. Um, and the last thing that you want to do when someone is drowning is toss them a 200-page manual about how to swim better. And so I thought maybe the best thing for me to do is just to take some of what I've been writing about now for well over a decade and distill it down into daily actionable nuggets for people so that they can have a concept, spend about 5 minutes with it, have a concept, consider a question or a challenge, and just think about how they're going to apply that day to help them be just a little bit better, right? I mean, it's the title of the show, just be a little bit better at what they do every day. And that was really the intent, was just to make it more practical, actionable on a daily basis. Because as you and I both know, like, most people don't need more information. They just need to act on the things that they probably already know, but they maybe have forgotten just because they're so overwhelmed with daily life. So that's really what Daily Creative was designed to do, just to be that daily prompt to act on some of those really good things that maybe they've forgotten to act on.
That's fantastic. This is Dorie Clark. We're here with our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. And our guest this week is Todd Henry. He's the author of a new book. It's called Daily Creative. And we want to say hi to some of our great folks tuning in from around the world. Cynthia is joining from Hollywood. We've got Zulima back from Mexico. Maureen is joining us here. We've got Kathy from St. Louis. Allison's in Toronto. Cliff is saying hi from Maryland. Alicia is back from Berkeley. Peter is tuning in from Edinburgh. And Todd from New York. My good friend Todd Churches, a previous guest on the show, says always interested in hearing what other Todds have to say. So I appreciate that solidarity. That's a good spirit there.
Us Todds, we have to stick together. There aren't many of us, so we run in pods. Todds run in pods. That's our new motto right there. That's a freebie.
I love it. I love it. It's a very important principle. So Todd, a question that I have for you: there's a lot of talk in the business world around innovation. That seems to be the super sexy thing that people are seeking. But talk to me a little bit about how you think of creativity and innovation. Are they actually the same thing? Are they different? What good does it do, quote unquote, for us to be more creative?
So innovation is typically applied creativity, right? Is the way that we think of it. Creativity in and of itself is just problem solving. So whether you're a designer, a writer, a lion tamer, or you're a manager or an entrepreneur, or I hesitate to say accountant because we probably don't need like creative accounting, that has a different connotation, but you have to be creative as an accountant to solve your clients' problems. If you have to be creative every day, or if you have to solve problems every day, you're creative. That's what creativity is. Innovation, on the other hand, is applying that creativity to create a solution that transforms either a product or an industry or a service in some capacity that makes it different, makes it better. And so I think when a lot of people talk about innovation, what they really mean is I want to teach my people, I want to teach our team how to think differently. I want to teach our team how to be more creative, how to absorb the stimulus in our environment, play with it a little bit, combine it in unique ways, and come up with new and valuable solutions. The challenge is that often when people say we want innovation, what they really want is just a slight tweak of the thing we already have. It's they say, "Hey, I want something new. I want something innovative, something fresh, something that's never been thought of." Really, what they mean is just kind of take the thing we've already done and just tweak it a little bit, and that'll be fine. Often the initial response to innovation when we experience it is rejection. It's booing. I have a poster on my wall of, it's actually a real live thing that happened back in 1967. Jimi Hendrix was invited to be the opening act for the Monkees on their US tour, which, I mean, anybody who knows music knows this is like maybe the worst possible combination of artists, right? And of course, the result was predictable. Jimi Hendrix was booed off stage 8 nights in a row by Monkees fans, by tens of thousands of people. Does that mean Jimi Hendrix wasn't a great musician? No, of course not. What it meant was Monkees fans had no grid for what Jimi Hendrix was doing. So their first response was to boo, because, Monkees fans are expecting this sort of down the middle, sort of pop, fun, tap my toe kind of music. And then Hendrix comes out and he's like playing with his teeth and like all this distortion and, all the, they had no grid for what he was doing. That's often the response to innovation in organizations. People, managers especially, who are trying to protect their turf, they say, give me something new, but really just make sure that it's not something so dangerous that I'm going to have to fight for it and put skin in the game in order to see it happen. And so innovation requires a champion within organizations. If you don't have a champion for an innovation, it's often going to wither on the vine, because it's really, really difficult to get buy-in for new ideas when people feel like they're on the line for the success of that idea.
Yeah, really important point. We're here with Todd Henry. His new book is called Daily Creative. And if you're enjoying this conversation, hit the like button and the share button so that your friends can benefit from the conversation as well. And if you're just tuning in, let us know who you are and where you're dialing in from. We have great friends visiting, including Sushma, who's in India. We have Saeed here. We have Eugenia, who's joining from Costa Rica. Annette's in SoCal. We have Michaela from Manchester. We have Gail from North Carolina. And Jeanette is joining from Chile. We love having every single one of you here, and we're taking your questions for Todd Henry about creativity and more. Now, Todd, I wanted to drill down a little bit, because in terms of some of the exercises and things you talk about in Daily Creative, you talk about it as a guide to staying prolific and healthy. So it's about creativity, but it seems like it's maybe a broad definition of creativity. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're conceptualizing and how those pieces fit together?
Yeah. So most of us are tempted to rely on talent in order to sustain us as creative professionals. Again, as problem solvers. I always like to say talent will get you in the game, but it's your daily practices that keep you at the table, right? So talent might be your entry point into the marketplace, but those who thrive over the long term are people who have practices that sustain them when they're under pressure. Most of us have to deliver results on time, on budget, in order to keep our job. And so the way that we do that, the way that we prepare ourselves to be brilliant at a moment's notice, is by building practices that sustain us over time. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how that plays out. I was talking about 5 core areas where we have to build practices, and Daily Creative really is an extrapolation of these 5 core areas, where we talk about a lot of different facets of these 5 areas. The first one is focus. Focus about how we allocate our finite attention. We all have finite attention. We don't think we do, Dorie, but we have finite attention to spend on behalf of the work that matters to us. And really, focus is about how we allocate that attention and define problems effectively. So how are you defining the work that you're doing? How are you allocating your attention to that work? How are you prioritizing the problems that you're solving? These are really critical questions for us. Because it's tempting for us to bounce from thing to thing when we have so much going on. We lack a sense of cohesion. We lack a sense of clarity about the problems we're solving. We lack a sense of priority. So we just, we would rather crank out 50 emails because it feels productive rather than spending 20 minutes thinking deeply about a problem that we need to solve. Why? Because it gives us that sense of instant gratification. So we have to have a sense of focus. The second thing is relationships. Creative work is accomplished in community. I always say innovation is groups of people stumbling awkwardly into the unknown together. That's what it is. But we have to be intentional about building relationships where we can speak truth to one another, where we have healthy conflict. People think that conflict is a sign of a lack of health in organizations. It's not. As a matter of fact, a lack of conflict is a sign of a lack of health in organizations. Because if you have talented, driven, creative people bumping into one another, there's going to be conflict. That's the natural result of talented people bumping into one another. How you handle that is everything. So we have to have healthy relationships. We have to be willing to receive disconfirming information. We have to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. And we have to be willing to share and create an environment in which we can share our point of view. The third area is energy. So we have focus, relationships, energy. This is about how we manage our ability to bring what Lewis Hyde calls emotional labor to our work, right? Not just energy, but discretionary energy, that little extra that we put into it to make it great. But the problem is most of us manage our time effectively, but we fail to manage our energy effectively. The net result of that is we become overwhelmed and we lack what we need to be able to deliver. So we have to practice pruning consistently, meaning what good things might need to go away so something better can be born. So we have to be good at managing energy. The fourth area is stimuli. This is all of the inspiration that goes into our head, the little dots that we connect. Steve Jobs once famously quipped that creativity is just connecting things. So we have to be intentional about the kinds of dots we put into our head. So are you reading, studying, communing with great minds, reading Dorie Clark books? That's always a good place to go, right? Or watching Dorie Clark, podcast interviews, or
listening to Todd Henry's podcast. You can just tune in right there. There's so many possibilities.
But are you consistently studying and communing with great minds, right? Is that something that you are doing? And then finally is hours. Hours is how we allocate our finite time. Time is the currency of productivity. How we allocate that finite time is critical. But here's the thing. We have to be intentional about spending our hours effectively, not just efficiently. We often think about our time as, something to be spent, but we don't think about our time as something to be invested in future returns. So are you doing things like engaging in unnecessary creating, where you're developing skills that are going to serve you in the future, risking and failing in low risk ways, relatively low risk ways, so that you can develop skills that you can apply to your work later down the line. So focus, relationships, energy, stimuli, hours, they awkwardly spell the word fresh. And this was the core of my book, The Accidental Creative. My first editor, David Moldauer, for The Accidental Creative, originally hours was time. And he said, right now, Todd, you have frest. And frest is not very memorable, like David would say, right? And so we changed time to hours and we came up with fresh, which is a really easy way to remember it. And building practices in those areas. And again, that's what Daily Creative really is all about, is about helping people build practices in those areas that will help you to be prolific, brilliant, and healthy over the long term.
That's fantastic. This is Dorie Clark. We're here with our weekly interview show for Newsweek called Better. Our guest is Todd Henry. If you want to learn more about Todd and his great work, just go to his website. It's toddhenry.com. His new book is The Daily Creative. And if you want to make sure you never miss one of our weekly Newsweek interview shows, just go to dorieclark.com. You can sign up to download a free self-assessment and you will join the email list and you will get reminders of such things. So we're very excited to have all of you. Please feel free to type into the chat box and let us know who you are and where you're dialing in from. We have Adnan, who's just joined us from Turkey. And a great question came in, Todd, from Cynthia. And she's curious. Some people say that handwriting actually helps you to connect with your creativity better. And she's curious about your thoughts on that. She says, when doing your daily creative musing assignments, do you think it actually matters? And how do you do it?
So I think it varies from person to person. I have seen a lot of the research that says that our minds function differently when we're operating in real space versus virtual space, right? And this is true of books as well as, handwriting versus typing. The benefit of typing is you can get things out much more quickly. You can get ahead of your brain, which means that maybe sometimes you'll type unexpected things that are serendipitous. The benefit of handwriting is that it slows you down and forces you to look for patterns. I personally prefer handwriting over typing. I handwrite when I'm journaling, I handwrite when I'm taking notes. When I'm writing books, I type because, well, first of all, because I don't want to have to go back and retype all of my handwritten words, my 70,000 handwritten words, but also, what I find is when if I'm studying and I'm processing as I'm handwriting, when I go to type that out, sometimes my brain has been working on things in the background and I'll actually write things I didn't expect to write. I'll make, serendipitous connections I didn't expect to make. And that works really well for me. But yes, I've seen all the same research. I think it all depends on personal preference. I like the benefit. I do most of my handwriting on my iPad, so I'm sort of cheating in a way because I use Notability and I'm kind of digital, but I'm also kind of in the physical space as well. But me seeing things on paper helps me retain them, memorize them, connect them in different ways that if I'm typing them into a document. So I always recommend that people, when they're sketching, ideating, that they do that, with pen and paper or on the iPad with a stylus or whatever they have to be using. And when you're processing and when you're putting work into the world, it's usually easier and quicker to do that, in the virtual space. But I don't know about you, Dorie, but I remember things when I'm reading a physical book differently than when I'm reading an ebook. So I'll remember, oh, this is the top left of page 42. Like I'll remember that and I can
Totally.
see it in
Yes.
my head, right? Versus in virtual space, it's like somewhere in the ether. I have to go back through and find it somewhere out in cyberspace. It's just not the same experience.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and it's true. When you have the physicality of handwriting, it's helpful. My poor mother, who's logging in here, tried to get me a handwriting tutor when I was in third grade, and it just didn't go well. So mostly I type, but yes, it is a powerful tool for creativity as well. We're here with Todd Henry. You can learn more. Check out his books, including the latest one. It's the Daily Creative at toddhenry.com. And the great questions are streaming in, Todd. We had one from Anna, our friend in New Hampshire, and she wants to know, how can we use neuroscience to shape our creativity? Do you have some favorite sort of research or some findings about creativity that you've found to be particularly interesting as you have made this an object of study?
Yeah, one thing that I would encourage people to pay very close attention to is something that the research calls latent inhibitions, right? So what they've discovered is that people who tend to have more consistent creative ideas, in other words, a higher frequency of creative connections, creative outputs in the same period of time, tend to be people who have lower latent inhibitions, meaning they don't listen to that inner voice that says, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe people are going to laugh at you. Maybe you should ignore that. That's tried. That's, trite. That's whatever. Instead, for whatever reason, those ideas tend to get through that wall of latent inhibitions and out into the world. And so pay attention to those narratives. Pay attention to those little voices in your head when you have an idea. And if you do that, and journaling is a great way to do this, but if you do that, you'll often find that there's a recurring pattern. Who are you to say this? Who are you to introduce this? That's stupid. That's tried. Other people are going to come up with a better idea. This is especially true in meetings. And so pay attention to that, because one of the ways that we can improve the quality of our creative ideas is by improving the quantity of our creative ideas, right? Quantity and quality are almost directly connected when it comes to creativity. People think that, brilliant people just come with these fully formed ideas out of the womb and they just introduce them and it's like, voila, ta-da, that's not the way it happens. Usually there's a steady stream of hundreds of really terrible ideas that led to that final refinement, that great idea. And often it's a combination of those maybe not quite sufficient ideas that are combined into something that becomes that final idea. So pay attention to those latent inhibitions, those little voices in your head that prevent you from introducing ideas. Surprise, by the way, also is a great way to generate, to spark new ideas. And so one of the tools that we use is a kind of free association tool where we have people generate a bunch of random words. We have a framework for it, but generate a bunch of random words and then start bouncing those words together, combining those words to kind of surprise your brain and to try to force fit an idea into these two words. And we've come up with some really amazing ideas because there are things lurking in your brain you're not aware of. And then boom, when you experience stimulus, all of a sudden, they're prompted to the forefront of your mind. So yeah, I think pay attention to latent inhibitions and then try to structure surprise into your life and force fit ideas into that surprise. And that's always a really effective way of generating ideas.
Great points. We're here with Todd Henry. He's the author of the new book, Daily Creative. And thank you, Anna. She says, I love this interview. And if you are loving this interview, hit the like and share button so that your friends can benefit and tune in as well. And so many great questions are coming in, Todd. Folks are really engaged. Alicia is joining us from Berkeley, and she's curious, can you talk a little bit about more on the question of relationships, how to have healthy conflict and difficult conversations? You had mentioned that this is not a bad thing. This is actually a good thing and a necessary skill. Can you double down on that a little bit and talk more about how we can get better at that?
Yeah. So most conflict in organizations that I've encountered is the result of two things. Number one, I have expectations of you that I have not communicated to you. And number two, you're not hitting those expectations, right? So I am frustrated that you're not hitting expectations that I have not clearly communicated that I have of you. So we have to be very mindful of expectations that we layer on top of other people. So that's something personal that we can do. Just be mindful of the fact that often we ascribe ill will where incompetence is more likely to blame, so we have to be mindful of that. Second thing I'll say is we have to be very careful about how we deliver feedback and how we seek feedback within organizations, because this is also another inflection point for conflict in organizations. It's always a good idea to approach any feedback session by asking questions and helping the other person navigate to a better possible solution. So for example, instead of saying, I don't like this, can you change this to that, or make this a little bit more like this, right? We do that because we're running low on time, because we're under pressure, because we want to guarantee that the result is what it needs to be. Instead, as a manager, step in and ask, hey, I noticed that you made this particular decision with this project. Help me understand why you made that decision. Help me understand your line of thinking. Why did you choose this versus that? And then as you have that conversation, you might get to a point where you realize, oh, this is kind of where things went off the rails from your perspective. And you can say, what if instead of doing this, what if you made this decision instead? How might that impact the work? You're helping the other person to navigate to a better place by themselves, rather than telling them what to do, which is going to feel like control, which means what? They're going to shut their brain off and they're going to say, okay, fine, just tell me what to do, which is often what happens, right? Okay, fine, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. That's not what you want. What you want is to help people think in new and different ways about the work so they can continue to deliver that work moving forward. So that's the second thing, is be very mindful about how you deliver feedback and do it from a position of influence rather than a position of control of the other person. The third thing is the way that you handle conflict or disagreements in organizations is incredibly important. And I'm going to give a couple of principles for that. The first thing is we have to agree on common ground from the start, right? Let's make sure we're actually arguing about the same thing. So much conflict in organizations isn't even sourced in the same problem. It's I'm arguing one thing, you're arguing another, and we realize after 20 minutes, we're not even talking about the same thing here. There's no common point of disagreement. So we have to make sure we're arguing about the same thing. The second thing is we have to make certain that we can articulate the other person's point of view. So I should be able to argue why you think your idea is right. You should be able to argue why I think my idea is right, to the point that each of us are satisfied with the other person's explanation. And then finally, the moment that any conflict gets personal, everybody loses. So this cannot be personal. I disagree with your idea. That's fine. And let's have a conversation about that. I disagree with that idea, and those are ugly shoes. Okay, those are fighting words. We can't, so we cannot let conflict become personal. We see this in organizations where cults of personality emerge, and people are arguing not because they really disagree, but because they just want to be on one side or the other. We have to be really mindful about that. It sounds silly. It sounds like seventh grade. It really does. but these are human dynamics that play out often in organizations because organizations are made of humans, so if we follow these principles of effective, and I wrote about this in Herding Tigers, my last book, which was about leading talented creative people. If we follow these principles of effective conflict resolution, we follow the principles of clear and coherent feedback that's not based on control, but is based on influence. And if we ensure that we're not layering unfair expectations on other people that we've not communicated to them, it will go a long way toward helping us develop healthy communication and those relationships that we need to be able to do our work together.
Great points. We're here with Todd Henry. His new book is Daily Creative. And we have time, Todd, for probably one more question. And Anna wanted to jump in with another one. I think this is probably something that a lot of us are feeling post-pandemic. She says, how can we keep creativity awakened when we're feeling stuck or we're feeling stymied? A lot of people have come out of a period of time where, they've just been keeping their head above water. They've been in a little bit of a rut, but we now have this opening. How can we take the best advantage of it? And I'll just layer on top of it. I know this is a book of exercises. Maybe you might be willing to give us one. So what do you think, and how would you respond?
Yeah, so I'll talk about something that is a theme in Daily Creative. A lot of the time, the reason that we feel stuck has little to do with our capacity, our abilities, our talent, even our drive or our passion. It's more to do with the fact that we know that whatever we put out there is going to be judged by others, and rightly so, because we're being paid to do a job, right? So one of the practices that I encourage people to implement in Daily Creative, and I wrote about this in the Accidental Creative as well, is something I call back burner creating. Back burner creating means having some practice in your life where you're engaging in a creative act that is only for you. Nobody is judging it. Nobody's going to come along and say, why are you doing it that way? Right? Maybe they'll even see it. It could be things like writing a novel. It could be things like starting a garden, painting, developing some kind of new skill, learning a musical instrument. This does a couple of interesting things for us. Number one, it allows us to develop new skills and take risks in a relatively low risk way. Number two, it gives us creative reprieve from our work, and it engages our creative brain in an act that is where we don't feel the same level of pressure, right? It retrains us how to be creative for the sake of creativity versus being creative for the sake of delivering on an objective, which is what most of us have to do. I mean, I work with, top creative directors, executive creative directors, CEOs, executives from companies all over the world. And often, I'll ask them, hey, what did you used to love about the work? And they'll say like, oh, I used to be a designer and I love design and I just like swam in design. And so my follow-up question is usually, when was the last time you designed something that nobody was judging, nobody was looking at, nobody was critiquing, wasn't for a client? And the answer almost always is, maybe sometime last year. Like, I can't remember the last time I made something just for myself. So my encouragement right now for those who feel stuck, feel burned out, feel like, they're just kind of in COVID fatigue. So I know we're kind of on the other side, right? But it's like we still feel the fatigue, the effects of it. It's like a train engaging. You got all the cars going, right? We're still kind of re-engaging on the other side of this. Is have something in your life where you can pour your energy and your passion into that's going to help you develop that creative side where you're not under pressure. Then what you'll find is a reawakened passion for creativity in your create on demand world as well.
That is a really powerful note to end on and a great suggestion. We've been here with Todd Henry. If you want to learn more about him, go to his website. It's toddhenry.com. His new book is Daily Creative. This is Dorie Clark, and this has been our weekly Newsweek interview show, Better. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. And Todd Henry, thank you for being here, my man.
Thank you, Dorie. This has been a sheer joy, as it always is when I get to speak with you.
Thank you so much, and see everyone next week.